So now we're going to talk about an opportunity for the public to get involved in, surveying for wildlife. We've talked a lot about what the DEC has done to look at different mammal species and fur bearer species throughout the state. So I'm going to be introducing the project that we're calling Snapshot New York. Right, move this slide. We kind of talked about this already in the previous discussions, but I'll just briefly remind everybody that some of the methods for monitoring fur bearers specifically in New York State are things like harvest reports, public sightings, and then the live trapping surveys that we talked about, as well as the camera trapping kind of on those smaller regional scales, looking at specific species like fisher and bobcat. And while these methods are very important and give us a lot of important information, especially with the harvest reports, you get a lot of good information on those species that are managed. However, they don't necessarily give us the best estimates of large scale, populations across the whole state. So they can introduce some bias. Mandy mentioned that, hunter and trapper participation kind of depends on a lot of different factors like weather and, if these people can even get out there and do trapping that year. So it really varies from year to year what the hunter and trapper participation is. And so it may not be the best method to estimate some populations across the whole state. As well as some of the other methods like live trapping and camera trapping, they are very labor intensive. And as she mentioned with the otter survey, people are going out, in the dead of winter and looking for otter sign. And that takes a lot of time and maybe isn't the most fun way of surveying for things, but these are some of the methods that we have been using and continue to use. One of the problems that the DEC has run into when trying to monitor for these species is that there's just simply not enough time or resources to survey for every single fur bearer or mammal species throughout the state. And while we do have a lot of beautiful, natural landscape in New York that is protected and managed by the state, still 60% of the state is owned by private landowners. And we do have an awesome group of private landowners participating in all these different projects, but it's not necessarily reliable all the time, and we can't get that type of participation across the state a lot of the times. And so a solution for this was to develop a hybrid monitoring system. So basically we have a state-run component where they will be surveying for all these different mammal species across the state using trail cameras. And then a secondary component of a more community-focused project, the SnapshotNY portion of it, for citizen scientists to get involved and put trail cameras on their privately owned lands. So we have kind of a dual system going on here. So SnapshotNY, just in general, has been a collaborative project that's been developed between the DEC as well as the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit at Cornell University. And the goals of the project are basically to collect as many trail camera images as we can of as many species of interest as we can, including things like bear and bobcat and deer, as well as fisher and moose and a whole slew of other species as well. And then the second goal is that we want to engage the public in this data collection. So we do have things like those sighting surveys for people to report when they see these animals. But SnapshotNY kind of offers a more direct way to get involved, where you have a trail camera on your own property and you can kind of see what wildlife is going on right where you live. So get more involved in the data collection portion. And then to just generally expand the knowledge of the status of mammal species in New York, we do these targeted surveys on species like bobcat and fisher, and so we can get a better idea of those guys. But when you're looking at kind of a wide range of species, it's kind of better to survey the whole state so that we can get information on more mammal species. So the kind of data that Snapshot collects has been mentioned in some of the previous talks, but I'll just go over it quickly again. We do detection, non-detection data is what we're collecting through these cameras. And that simply means, are we detecting a species? Yes, then they're there. And if we're not detecting a species, they're either not there or they were there and we didn't see them. So that kind of ends up being like a binary 1 and 0 situation, whether they're there or not. And from this detection, non-detection data, we can ultimately determine some things like population trends over time. We can kind of monitor and track which populations are increasing or decreasing throughout the state. We can also determine things like sex ratios, how many males to females there are, and as you've learned from previous presentations here, that is an important metric to know for, different hunting and trapping portions of getting involved with wildlife here. And then we can also determine some juvenile and adult ratios as well. And distribution, so that means basically just where are these animals on the landscape. And then a more specific metric is density. And we can only determine this for, certain species where we are able to identify down to the individual. And so that just means we know the number of animals in a given area. And on the image on the screen is a map of the density estimates of moose in the Adirondack Park. And you can see where the darker red and orange is the higher densities and the green is the lower densities. And so hopefully we can do this for some other species as well. So if you want to get involved in Snapshot New York, I'll just briefly go over kind of how it works and what the involvement process is. So the first thing you want to do is go to our website and check that out. It has a lot of useful information about the project. And it also has information on just the mammal species that we have in New York. So if you're looking to learn more about that, we do have a page for that as well. And it's a pretty simple process. You just go and sign up for an account and fill out your profile information. And then once you do that, you're going to need to select a grid cell. So the way that Snapshot New York works is there's 4,500 grid cells divided up throughout the state. And each of those grid cells is 30 square kilometers. So the reason why we chose 30 square kilometers is that kind of ends up being a rough average of some home range sizes of some of the larger mammals that are in the state. And so by spreading out the grid cells, we kind of reduce the chance that we're going to see the same individual, on different cameras in different grid cells. So putting them spatially farther apart helps. And kind of in the same vein, we are also putting one camera per grid cell, or having the volunteers put one camera per grid cell. And that's because of the type of data that we're collecting. So I mentioned the detection, non-detection data. If you add more cameras, it doesn't necessarily give you more information, because we're saying, yes, this species is present, or no, it is not. And so if you just have more cameras, you're just getting more yeses or more nos. And also, it's just a lot of data to collect, since it is a statewide project. And so limiting it to one camera per grid cell kind of allows us to manage that data a little bit better. And we do understand that, a lot of people would want to participate and don't necessarily, understand why we're only doing one camera per grid cell. And so we did develop a waitlist feature for folks, and you can still click on a grid cell that is taken and be put on a waitlist, because people are always, maybe dropping out of the project. They don't want to participate anymore, or they were interested in having their camera out, just during the hunting season. For a variety of reasons, people will be sending back, any loan cameras, or they will no longer need their grid cell. So you can get on a wait list for that. And after you have a grid cell selected, you are going to deploy your trail camera. So we developed a custom built app to do so. And this is a really important step in the process, because this gives us all the information about your trail camera. So we're going to collect things like the camera brand, what height you put it on the tree, which direction is it facing, north, south, etc. And it also collects the date that you put out your camera automatically for you, as well as the time that you start it. And it has a map feature. So if you take your phone, since it has GPS on your phone, you can just go out to the camera site and the map will pop up with a pin of your location. So you don't have to worry about, typing any coordinates. So trying to make that as streamlined as possible for folks. And then once you have your camera deployed, you're going to leave that out for, a couple of weeks and go in and check on it and pull the SD card out of the camera to upload your photos through our website. And I do have a few images from the project that we've collected so far in the background there. And once we have these images uploaded, we'll be able to use all this data to kind of continue to inform the management and conservation of these mammal species throughout New York State. And kind of similar to the things that we've already been mentioning, we can, set these expectations for population trajectories, which can inform these various management plans for species. And we can do things like set annual tag allocations or potentially modify things like bag limits and seasons lengths, all these things that we've been talking about throughout this webinar. And it can also inform any sort of habitat management that we'd want to do for species that are in need of more conservation. So this is kind of both a, game species and non-game species project. We're kind of collecting images of pretty much everything that we can catch on camera. So just a little bit of information about the current status of the project. We did officially launch it to the public at the end of June. And we've had a pretty steady incline of people applying to the project. And we now have over 850 grid cells across the state selected. So you can see on the map on the top, all those red grid cells are where people have selected those. And then on the map at the bottom is all the locations where we have cameras currently deployed. And I mentioned at the beginning that this is a hybrid project. So we are having DEC staff do some surveying for the project as well as our volunteer scientists. So the volunteer scientists are in blue and the DEC staff is in red down there. And we do have a loan camera project through Snapshot. However, we have sent out all of the ones that we had available, which was around 340. And we still have a lot of people on the wait list as well for all the different grid cells across the state. And I'm also taking a wait list for people who want to request a camera loan. So if you don't have your own, you can always request to get on the wait list for a loan camera as well. And I just checked recently and we have now over 2.3 million photos submitted. So that's really amazing. We've already collected a really large amount of data within the couple of months that we've been running the project. And granted, these are not all pictures of wildlife. Your camera's going to take pictures of wind and trees blowing, but still, it's a lot of exciting data. And people are still applying, and we're still trying to fill out the gaps in the state. You can kind of see on the map, the upper map, we do have a bit of space up in the Adirondacks where we don't have as many cameras, and that's kind of to be expected. There's less people, living in those regions. There's a lot more just wild land out there. So kind of my next step is to, as the community science coordinator, is to kind of reach out to these areas where we need more surveying done. And this slide is just sharing a few of the photos that we have collected from our wonderful citizen scientists so far. So we're getting pretty much everything on camera from, bears, bobcat, fox, fisher, down to squirrels. So we're getting it all. And that's really all I have. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who is already participating in Snapshot, as well as everyone who's been involved in the project, including DEC staff and Cornell staff. And I just wanted to share some of our social media links so you can follow and stay updated on Snapshot, and some of my contact information here. And that QR code will bring you directly to our website as well. And if you have any questions about the project, you can always email the SnapshotNY@cornell.edu. Try to stay really on top of that email because get a lot of questions about the project.